Love doesn't always die with a scream. Sometimes it dies on a Tuesday afternoon in October, while you're complaining about Sharon from accounting and your boyfriend of 5 years laughs and says, "Relax, princess," like he's reading from the wrong script. Then the room goes still. Not the kind of still that follows a joke, but the kind that follows a slip, when someone's mouth moves faster than their mind and reveals a language they weren't supposed to speak in your presence. He cleared his throat, looked down at his phone, said something about needing to check on work emails, and I stood there in our kitchen with the dishwasher humming and the October light slanting gold through the window above the sink, holding a coffee mug I'd been about to rinse, thinking, he's never called me that before. This isn't fiction. This is how love disappears, one small word at a time. We met when I was 27 and still believed that partnerships were built on grand gestures rather than the accumulation of ordinary evenings. Daniel was different from the men I'd dated before. Calmer, steadier, the kind of person who remembered to buy milk before you realized you were out. He worked in software development, kept his apartment clean without being obsessive about it, and laughed at my jokes even when they weren't particularly funny. By our second year together, we'd fallen into the kind of rhythm that people mistake for permanence. Sunday mornings meant pancakes and the crossword puzzle spread across the table, ink smudging on his thumb as he filled in the diagonal clues I could never see. Weeknight dinners happened around 7:30, after we'd both decompressed from work. Him on the couch scrolling through tech forums, me at the kitchen island answering emails I should have ignored. We'd moved in together after 3 years. His books mixed with mine on the shelves. His coffee mug lived next to mine in the cabinet above the sink. He had a way of saying my name that made it sound complete, Emma, with all the letters given their full weight, no shortcuts, no pet names. I'd asked him once, early on, why he never used nicknames. He'd shrugged, smiled that half smile he did when he was being sincere. "I guess I like your actual name," he'd said. "Plus, most nicknames feel a little, I don't know, cheesy?" I'd laughed, told him I agreed. And for 5 years, that's how it was. Emma, never M, never babe or honey or sweetheart, and definitely never princess. So when the word left his mouth that Tuesday, casual, automatic, like he'd said it 1,000 times before, my hands stopped moving. The mug stayed suspended over the sink. The water kept running. And I turned to look at him, trying to match the word to the man I thought I knew. He was already scrolling through his phone, jaw tight, the corners of his mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't neutral either. The afternoon sun caught the edge of his face, highlighting a tension I'd never learned to read. "Since when do you call me that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He didn't look up. "Call you what?" "Princess." "Did I?" He frowned, still focused on the screen. "Huh. Guess it just slipped out." And that should have been the end of it. People say things, words escape. Language is messy and imprecise, and 5 years of proximity means you absorb each other's vocabularies without meaning to. But the words sat wrong in the air between us, like furniture moved 2 inches to the left. Not broken, just suddenly, inexplicably unfamiliar. I turned off the faucet, set the mug in the dish rack, and told myself I was reading into nothing. After that night, I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to see. The way he smiled at his phone in the evenings, sitting on the couch with the blue light illuminating his face, his thumb moving across the screen in quick, practiced motions. How he'd started stepping out onto the balcony to take calls, even when it was cold enough to see his breath. The fact that his phone now lived face down on every surface, the nightstand, the kitchen counter, the arm of the couch. I didn't go looking for evidence. I told myself that. But evidence has a way of presenting itself once you know to look, like those optical illusions where you can't unsee the hidden image once someone points it out. It was small things at first. A contact in his phone labeled only with a crown emoji. No name, no number visible unless you opened it. I saw it one morning when he asked me to check a text while he was in the shower. The notification had appeared just as I picked up the phone. "Morning, thinking about you." I stared at it for 3 seconds. 4, 5. Then I set the phone back down on the bathroom counter and walked into the kitchen and poured myself coffee I didn't want. When he came out, hair damp and smelling like the soap we'd bought together at Target 2 months ago, I told him the text was from his coworker about a meeting. He nodded, picked up the phone, smiled at the screen, and typed something back before tucking it into his pocket. "Want scrambled or fried?" I asked, cracking eggs into a bowl. Scrambled's good, he said, and kissed my temple on his way to the coffee maker. The eggs tasted like paper. Memory rewrites itself in reverse. You look back at a scene you lived through and realize you were watching it wrong the first time, missing the subtext, mistaking the soundtrack. By November, I'd started cataloging moments that suddenly made sense in ways they hadn't before. The weekend he'd worked late 3 Fridays in a row, coming home smelling like cold air and cologne I didn't recognize. The new shirt I'd never seen him buy, navy blue with buttons that looked expensive. The way he'd started going to the gym in the mornings instead of after work, leaving the apartment at 6:30 with his duffel bag and his phone already glowing in his hand. One evening, I asked him about the crown emoji. We were folding laundry in the bedroom, sorting socks into pairs, and the question came out softer than I'd planned. Who's the contact with the crown in your phone? He didn't pause, didn't look up from the t-shirt he was folding. Oh, that's just Mike from the dev team. He changed his name to that as a joke after he won the hackathon last month. Mike uses a lot of emojis for a software developer, I said, and hated how it sounded. Suspicious, small, the voice of someone who'd already lost. Daniel laughed, easy and familiar. He's kind of extra like that. You'd like him. And I wanted to believe it. Wanted to fold that explanation into the pile with the clean laundry and move forward, but the text I'd seen hadn't said, thinking about the code or see you Monday. It had said thinking about you with a casualness that suggested it wasn't the first time. I folded his socks, matched them into pairs, tried to remember when I'd stopped trusting the shape of our life together. By mid-November, our apartment had started to feel like a stage set, familiar in its arrangement, but false in its warmth. Daniel still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still asked about my day over dinner, still reached for my hand when we watched TV in the evenings. But there was a distance now, a fractional space that hadn't existed before, like he was performing the role of boyfriend while his mind lived somewhere else. I caught him smiling at nothing one night, standing at the kitchen window with a mug of tea cooling in his hands, his expression soft in a way I hadn't seen in months. When I asked what he was thinking about, he blinked, looked at me like he'd forgotten I was there, and said, "Nothing, just tired." But he didn't look tired. He looked like someone remembering something beautiful. The phone calls grew more frequent. He'd excuse himself during dinner, step out onto the balcony, even though it was 30 degrees and starting to snow, and come back 10 minutes later with cold hands and a smile he tried to hide. Once I stood near the door and heard him laugh. Not the polite chuckle he used with his parents or the dry humor he shared with his friends, but something younger, lighter, unguarded. I didn't confront him. Confrontation requires certainty, and I only had suspicion shaped like dread. Instead, I started checking his phone when he was in the shower, not systematically, not with purpose, just looking. The crown emoji contact had no thread, no message history, no photos, nothing. Either he deleted everything or they talked somewhere else. WhatsApp maybe, or Telegram, or some app I didn't know existed. I hated myself for looking, hated the person I was becoming, suspicious, quiet, performing normalcy while my hands shook when I heard his phone buzz. But I couldn't stop, because not knowing felt worse than discovering the truth. The turning point came on a Thursday. Daniel was in the bedroom on a FaceTime call. I was in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher, and the apartment was arranged such that sound carried if you weren't careful. He must have thought I couldn't hear him. Or maybe he'd stopped caring whether I did. I heard his voice first, soft, lower than usual, intimate in a way that made my hands go still on the plate I was rinsing. Then I heard the words. "Hey, princess, sorry. Yeah, I can talk now." The plate slipped, caught the edge of the sink, didn't break. I stood there with soap on my hands and water running and my heart doing something I couldn't name, not breaking, not yet, but preparing to. That tone, that tenderness, the casual ease of the nickname, like it had been polished smooth through repetition. He'd never used that voice with me. Not once in 5 years. I turned off the water, dried my hands on the towel hanging from the oven handle, walked to the bedroom doorway, not trying to be quiet, not trying to hide. I wanted him to know I'd heard. He was sitting on the edge of our bed, his back to me, shoulders relaxed in a way they never were after work. The phone was angled away, but I could see the glow of it on his face, the smile he wore like it belonged to someone else. I miss you too, he was saying, and his voice was so soft it barely carried. Yeah, tomorrow. I'll figure something out. I cleared my throat. He turned, and for half a second his face stayed open, unguarded, still shaped by whatever conversation he'd been having. Then he saw me. And the expression shifted. Not guilty, exactly, but caught. Like an actor realizing he'd walked onto the wrong stage. Hey, he said, too bright. I'll call you back, he told the phone, and ended the call before I could see who was on the other end. Who was that? I asked. Mike from work. Mike? I repeated. Yeah, he's having some issues with his girlfriend and needed advice. I stood in the doorway and looked at the man I'd built 5 years of my life around, and realized I didn't believe him. Worse, I realized he didn't expect me to. You called him Princess, I said quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened. What? Just now, on the call. You said, "Hey, Princess." The silence that followed was the loudest sound in the room. He looked at me, I looked at him, and in that space between us, something that had been fracturing for weeks finally broke clean through. It's just a joke between us, he said finally. It doesn't mean anything. You told me nicknames were cheesy. Emma, you said you didn't like them, that they felt false. He stood up, ran a hand through his hair, looked anywhere but at me. Can we not do this right now? Do what? This, whatever this is, I'm tired, okay? Work's been exhausting, and I don't have the energy for... For what? My voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that lives on the other side of panic. For explaining why you're calling someone else by a name you said you'd never use. He closed his eyes, let out a long breath, and when he opened them again, he looked like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for too long and had finally decided to set it down. I need some air, he said, and walked past me into the living room, grabbed his jacket, and left. The apartment door clicked shut. The lock turned. And I stood there in the bedroom we'd shared for 2 years, surrounded by evidence of a life we'd built. His books, my clothes, the framed photo of us at his sister's wedding, and felt the ground shift beneath everything I'd believed was solid. He came back 3 hours later. I was sitting on the couch with the lights off, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago, staring at nothing. He didn't apologize, didn't explain, just sat down in the chair across from me, forearms on his knees, hands clasped, and said, "We should talk." Okay, I said. I've been seeing someone. The words arrived like facts, not confessions. There was no preamble, no build-up, just the truth, delivered plainly, the way you'd announce the weather. I didn't cry, didn't shout. I just sat there, holding my cold tea, and asked, how long? 4 months, 4 months, a third of a year, a season, long enough to have built something, to have routines, to have nicknames that felt natural instead of borrowed. Do you love her? I asked. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Not guilt, but sadness. The kind of sadness that comes from knowing you've hurt someone and there's no way to undo it. I don't know, he said quietly. Maybe. I set the mug down on the coffee table. Why didn't you just leave? I kept thinking it would stop, that it was just, I don't know, a distraction, something that would burn out. Did it? No. The heating system kicked on, the radiator clanked. Outside, a car alarm went off 3 blocks away and then stopped. What's her name? I asked. He hesitated, then softly. Claire, Claire. Not a crown emoji, not a secret. A person with a name and a face and a voice that made him sound like someone I'd never met. How did you meet her? At a conference in September. September. The same month I'd started noticing him smile at his phone. The same month he'd started taking calls outside. The same month I'd started losing him without realizing it was already too late to hold on. Are you going to see her tomorrow? I asked. He nodded. Then I think you should stay somewhere else tonight. He didn't argue, didn't try to negotiate or explain or ask for forgiveness I wasn't ready to offer. He just stood up, walked into the bedroom, and packed a bag while I sat on the couch, listening to drawers open and close, zippers pull, keys jangle. When he came back out, bag over his shoulder, he stopped in front of me. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. I looked up at him, this man I'd loved for 5 years, who'd shared my bed and my routines and my future, and realized that sorry was the smallest word in the world when held up against everything it was trying to carry. "I know," I said. He left, the door closed, the lock clicked, and I sat in the dark, in the apartment that still smelled like him, and finally started crying, not loudly, not desperately, but in the quiet, relentless way that happens when you've been holding your breath for too long, and your body finally remembers how to let go. The days after were strange and soft-edged, like living under water. I called in sick to work, didn't answer my phone, spent hours sitting on the couch with the TV on but the sound off, watching people move through scenes I couldn't follow. Daniel came back twice to collect more of his things. Both times, I made sure I wasn't home. I didn't want to see him loading his life into boxes, didn't want to watch him sorting through what was his and what was ours, deciding which memories he'd take and which he'd leave behind, like artifacts of a person he used to be. My best friend Sarah came over on Saturday with wine and takeout, and the kind of careful sympathy that made everything hurt worse. She didn't ask me to explain, just sat next to me on the couch, let me cry into her shoulder, and told me I was allowed to fall apart. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said. But that was the problem. I hadn't. I'd been steady, reliable, present. I'd built a life with someone who'd decided he wanted a different one, and there was no single moment I could point to and say, "This is where I failed." Just the slow accumulation of distance I hadn't known how to measure until it was too wide to cross. In the weeks that followed, I started looking backward with new eyes. Scenes replayed in my mind, but differently now, like watching a film you've seen before and suddenly noticing the foreshadowing you missed the first time. The weekend in August when he'd been distracted at dinner, checking his phone every few minutes, smiling at messages he didn't share. I'd thought he was stressed about work. Now I wondered if that was when it started, before the conference, before Claire had a name, when she was just a possibility he was already leaning toward. The night in early October when we'd had sex and it had felt mechanical, routine, like he was going through the motions of intimacy without inhabiting it. I told myself we were just tired. Now I realized he'd already started saving his tenderness for someone else. The morning I'd found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a restaurant we'd never been to. He'd said it was a work lunch, and I'd believed him, because I wanted to. Because believing was easier than questioning, and questioning would have meant admitting that the foundation I'd been standing on was already cracked. I thought about Claire, wondered what she looked like, how she laughed, whether she knew about me. Wondered if he called her princess in the daylight or only in the dark. Whether she'd asked about me and he'd told her the truth. Or whether I'd been erased from his narrative. A plot, point he no longer needed. I hated that I thought about her at all. By December, Daniel had moved out completely. The apartment felt larger without his things, echoey in a way it hadn't before. I rearranged the furniture, moved the couch, took down the photos, bought new curtains, tried to make the space feel like mine instead of ours. He texted once, "How are you?" I stared at the message for 10 minutes before typing back. Fine, it was a lie, but it was the only answer I could give without unraveling again. I started seeing a therapist. Spent 50-minute sessions talking about trust and patterns and why I'd mistaken consistency for happiness. She asked me if I'd seen it coming. I said no. Then I went home and realized I had. Not in big ways, but in small ones. The way he'd stopped asking about my day, the way I'd stopped expecting him to. The slow, quiet erosion of intimacy that we'd both let happen because it was easier than fighting to keep it. "Do you miss him?" Sarah asked me one night over Chinese food in my newly rearranged living room. I thought about it. I miss who I thought he was. That's not the same thing. I know. And I did, because the Daniel I'd loved, the one who'd folded my laundry and made me pancakes and said my name like it was complete, wasn't the same Daniel who'd called someone else princess in a voice I'd never heard. They were the same person, but different versions, and I'd only ever known one of them. Spring came slowly, the snow melted, the trees bloomed. I started running in the mornings, something I'd never done before, finding a strange peace in the rhythm of my feet on pavement and the burn in my lungs that was physical instead of emotional. I didn't hear from Daniel after that one text. Didn't see him. Didn't search for him online or ask mutual friends how he was doing. I deleted his number, unfollowed him everywhere, let him become someone I used to know instead of someone I was still trying to understand. Sometimes late at night, I'd think about that Tuesday in October, the way he'd laughed and said princess like it was the most natural thing in the world, the way his face had gone still when he'd realized what he'd done. And I'd wonder if that was the moment he'd decided to stop pretending, or if he'd already decided weeks before and was just waiting for the right time to tell me. I'd never know. And slowly, carefully, I was learning to be okay with that. One evening in May, I was walking home from the grocery store when I saw them. Daniel and a woman with dark hair and a laugh that carried across the street. They were holding hands, his thumb tracing circles on her wrist the way he used to do with mine, and when she looked up at him, he smiled, that soft, unguarded smile I'd seen on his face when he stood at our kitchen window thinking about nothing. I stood there on the corner with a bag of groceries getting heavy in my arms and watched them disappear into a restaurant I'd never been to, and I waited to feel something, anger, grief, betrayal, but all I felt was tired. He'd found someone who made him feel like the person he wanted to be. And I'd spent 5 years with someone who'd been pretending. Neither of us had been wrong exactly, just incompatible in ways neither of us had the courage to name until it was too late to fix. I walked home, put the groceries away, made dinner for one, and sat on my couch in my rearranged apartment with new curtains and no photos, eating pasta and watching the sun set through the window, thinking about how love doesn't always die with a scream. Sometimes it dies with a word. Sometimes you don't even notice until you're standing in the wreckage, holding the pieces, trying to remember what it looked like whole. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the piece that follows is enough.